Sarah Matthews, a 38-year-old woman, stood in her luxurious modern dining room, holding 5 invitation cards in her hand. She had meticulously planned this dinner for weeks. The long wooden table in front of her was set with elegant candles, wine glasses, and gourmet food. As she glanced at the cards, a determined expression crossed her face. The evening was about to begin, and she had a message to share. The doorbell rang, and 5 guests arrived, each looking slightly confused. Mrs. Carter, Sarah's elderly teacher, walked in first, her gray hair in a neat bun. She was followed by David, a 40-year-old man wearing a black suit, who looked around curiously. Next, Sarah's father, John, entered, adjusting his navy blue shirt, followed by her mother, Linda, who wore a dark green blouse. Last to arrive was Mark, a man in his mid-40s, dressed casually in a gray shirt. Sarah welcomed them at the door, her face radiating warmth, but her mind was set on the conversation she had to have tonight. Once everyone was seated at the long table, the atmosphere was tense. Sarah stood at the head of the table, raising a wine glass. "A toast," she said, her voice steady. The guests hesitated for a moment before following her lead, lifting their glasses. But no one took a sip, the weight of the evening was too much. The food remained untouched, and the silence in the room grew heavier with each passing second. Sarah turned to Mrs. Carter, her childhood teacher, and placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Thank you for everything you've taught me," Sarah said. Mrs. Carter, now an elderly woman with gray hair in a bun, looked up at her with soft, emotional eyes. The others around the table watched quietly, sensing the depth of their bond. Sarah's gaze shifted to David, who sat across the table, visibly uncomfortable. She studied him carefully before speaking. "David," she said firmly. He adjusted his suit jacket nervously as he met her eyes, avoiding the awkward silence between them. The other guests shifted in their seats, sensing the tension that had grown between them. Sarah now turned to her parents. Her father, John, sat with his arms crossed, his gray hair slightly disheveled. Her mother, Linda, bit her lip, her expression filled with concern. Sarah's heart raced as she looked at them, her mind swirling with emotions. The moment had come to confront them about what had been hidden for years. Mark sat at the end of the table, looking around at the tension in the room. His face was full of confusion as he glanced between Sarah and the others. Sarah stood beside him, preparing to reveal the truth. The weight of the revelation hung in the air, and the others remained silent, waiting for Sarah to speak. A flashback appeared in Sarah's mind. She was much younger, only 20, and sitting on a park bench in the cold night, feeling weak and hungry. Mark had approached her then, handing her a sandwich with kindness in his eyes. At that moment, Sarah had been at a crossroads in her life, and it was Mark who had helped her when no one else would. The memory was vivid, filled with emotion and gratitude. Back in the present, Sarah's parents were in shock. Her father leaned forward in his seat, his face twisted in disbelief. Her mother covered her mouth, eyes wide with surprise. The guests around the table were equally stunned, some glancing nervously at each other. Sarah stood tall, her emotions restrained but visible as she revealed the truth she had kept hidden for years. Mark stared at Sarah, his expression slowly changing from confusion to realization. He sat still, his hand resting on the table as he processed the weight of her words. Sarah looked at him with deep gratitude, her eyes filled with years of unspoken thanks. The room fell into a deep silence, the truth settling heavily over them all. Sarah slid an envelope across the table toward Mark. Mark's eyes widened in surprise as he picked it up. The guests looked on, some curious, some moved by the gesture. Sarah's expression was warm yet serious as she prepared to make the final gesture that would complete the evening's revelation. In a quiet, emotional moment, Sarah raised her wine glass, her eyes shining with tears. One by one, the others followed suit: Mark, Mrs. Carter, David, and Sarah's parents. Each person raised their glass, their emotions mixed, some teary-eyed, some reflective. The room was bathed in the soft glow of candlelight, creating a serene and intimate moment of understanding, connection, and healing.